Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr,
business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr Business Consulting.
Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs and business owners maximize their potential and build rock-solid businesses. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Well, in today's episode, I welcome back Simon Alexander Ong. Simon is a personal development entrepreneur, an award-winning life coach and business strategist, keynote and public speaker, and author of the new book, Energize. Check out episode 130 for our first conversation, where we talk about Simon's backstory, the difference between success and fulfillment, a mental board of advisors, and why you may want to consider having one yourself, lessons learned through 2 business failures, and more. Well, on this episode, we dive deep into Simon's new book, Energize, where we discuss key insights and practical advice to help you transform your energy and transform your life. Please welcome back to Business Minds Coffee Chat, the amazing Simon Alexander Ong. Simon, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much. And again, for the kind introduction.
It is my pleasure, and I'm super excited about today's conversation. You know, we did a lot of exploration on the first episode, and it was a great one, and we've gotten some fantastic responses. What we were not able to do due to time was to really explore more deeply the key insights and big takeaways from your latest book. So I'd really like to focus our conversation on the book itself. And I have had the pleasure of reading the book. I've actually gone through it more than once, and there's so much depth to it. And the thing that I realized when I was reading it was, based on our first conversation, you write the way that you speak and the way that you present. So I've seen enough of your presentations, your content, and the way that you present yourself truly is, it's amazing. You connect well with people. You speak from the heart. Obviously, you speak from a base of knowledge and wisdom and through your own experiences, and you bring that to the surface through this book. So I really appreciate that and wanted to acknowledge you for that as well. So this is your debut book, Energize, and you introduce the readers to the art and science of energy management. Before we really dig into the content, I wanted to bring up to you about the book endorsements that you received. And you received some really amazing endorsements from the likes of Marshall Goldsmith, Simon Sinek, Marie Forleo, and others. Share with us what the process was like to receive those book endorsements, how you were able to do that, and how that has helped with launching the book itself.
Well, first of all, Jay, you're right. Those were incredible endorsements to receive. And it's interesting because when I look back, I received most of those endorsements within the space of 7 to 9 days at the beginning of 2022. And for me, that was kind of like my Christmas. You know, everyone was celebrating Christmas a few weeks before in December 21, but for me, it was in January 22, because I felt like a kid on Christmas Day morning when I started to receive these emails saying, I want to give you a blurb for the book. Now, how these came about is a result of a habit that I've cultivated since first starting my business all those years ago. And it's a habit that I expand on in the book within the chapter, Electrify Your Environment. So I've been very conscious about electrifying my environment since the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. Now, what I mean by electrify your environment is not just spend it around people who give you good energy, who challenge you, who inspire you to that next level, but also to have diverse inputs into that environment. And so when I would go to workshops, for example, I wanted to think different. I wanted to connect with people way ahead of me in the game. And so while most would sit at the middle or at the back of the room, I would make a beeline for the front of the room because I knew that the people I would be sitting on the left and right of would be incredible individuals. And chances are they would probably be connected to the speaker. They may even be their entourage. And so to relate to the example of Marie Forleo's endorsement, for example, I was at an event that Marie did a few years ago, and it was an intimate event of around 60 to 70 people in a private members club, and I sat, I think it was second or third row from the front, and at the end of the talk, as you can imagine, everybody was queuing up to get Marie to sign a copy of her book, to take selfies, to take photos, to take videos. And I said to myself at that time that I would probably have to wait a while before I could have a chance to speak to Marie herself. And so I saw this gentleman sitting on the front row. He had this crazy hair, he had sunglasses on, wild clothing. And I just walked up to him and I said, I had to speak to you because you just stood out from the front row. Not just the way you look in your clothing, but I noticed you were clapping all the way throughout Marie's talk. You must be a really avid supporter of her work. And he said to me, wherever Marie is, I am. And I said to myself, you must be a very keen supporter. And he said to me, well, someone has got to do her hair, right? And it was at that moment that I realized that he was her hairstylist. So while everyone was speaking to Marie, I was building this relationship with her hairstylist. I asked him, how long are you in London for? And he said they were here for a week. And so I shared with him some restaurants and bars and places they had to check out while they were here in London. And by the end of it, we connected on Instagram. Now, I didn't know at the time that I was going to write a book a few years later, but it is a great example of building your network, building your relationships, and being bold in who you speak to and who you open conversations with. And it was a few years later, a couple of days before we were to finalize the endorsements, where my publisher said to me, we sent an email to Marie's team, but we haven't received a response back. And with a couple of days to go, I thought, it's worth a shot, Simon. Why don't I drop a message to her hairstylist? And so I hopped onto Instagram and I simply wrote a message saying, hey, I hope all is well. You're having a good start to the year. My publisher has sent an email to Marie's team, but we haven't heard back. I'm wondering if it's okay, and fine if it's not, but I just thought if it's okay, if you could give her and the team a bit of a nudge. 2 days later, one day before we had to finalize the endorsements, he dropped me a message back and he said, Simon, I pushed, I nudged, I reminded, and they will be responding tomorrow morning with a blurb for your book. Now, that's one example of how an endorsement came about, but it wasn't because I thought these are the people I want an endorsement from, I'm going to go and get it from them. In fact, a lot of these endorsements came from relationships that I'd built years before I'd even started to write a book, even before I'd even thought about the idea of writing a book. And so it's building those relationships, adding value, being of service to others that allows you to cultivate the network where you don't quite know how you're going to use them yet, but you never know what the future holds.
Wow, that's such a valuable lesson for all of us. And, I recall that there was a book written by Harvey Mackay that was called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And it's a perfect analogy for what you're talking about, because the book really is about building relationships and building those relationships early. And to your point, we don't necessarily know when we may need those relationships, but if you're building them early, if you're looking for a way to serve, to contribute, to be able to help someone else, it's, if we believe in the law of reciprocity, if we do good, if we are always looking for a way to give first without the expectation of receiving, things have a way of coming back around. And you gave a great example of that. And it also makes me think of the proximity principle. So you were intentional about putting yourself in proximity of the right people. So you place yourself in the front of a presentation or sitting in the first few rows as opposed to sitting in the back. That's an intentional decision that you make. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's some great lessons in there and some good nuggets for all of us to be able to take away from. So let's dig then into the book itself. So Energize is really, it's broken down into 4 key parts. We've got awaken your power, rewire your energetic state, protect your personal energy, and then supercharge your impact. And I wanted to take a moment, or ask you to take a moment, to talk about the opening of this book, which is the first part of Awaken Your Power, where you talk about your burnout to breakthrough moment. And I would love it if you would share part of that story, because it's so relevant, and I can almost sense that we're going to have others that are watching and listening right now that can certainly relate to something similar, because this really became the foundation to everything else that you write about in this book. So share that story with us, please.
Sure. So when I grew up, I had this mistaken belief that I had to achieve a job in certain industries in order to feel successful. And so after college, I went to university to study economics. And I started in the financial industry at what was probably the worst possible time. It was a year before the global financial crisis. And I think maybe my life would be different now if there was no crisis. Maybe I would have stayed at the first company I worked with, which was Lehman Brothers. If it didn't collapse and go into administration, maybe I would still be in that industry. But what happened is that after Lehman Brothers collapsed, I ended up working for another company, a hedge fund, which on the outside looks glamorous, but on the inside, it was terrible. It was a toxic environment. And in hindsight, it was pain that I needed to go through to show me the path to what I really wanted to do. Because up until that point, I was following what I thought was successful, but never really questioned the choices I made, and kind of just lived on autopilot. So this story that I share in the first chapter was really a culmination of a lot of things that came to the fore when I went to this entertainment event in the evening, a client entertainment event around Christmas. And I said to my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, I said to her, I will be taking the last train back. The last train would be leaving around 12:30, 12:45 in the morning. And so I descended into this nightclub. I checked in my jacket, my bag, and I proceeded to catch up with my colleagues and socialize with people from the industry. Now, as the night started to get underway, as you can imagine, drinks started flowing. The entertainment was glamorous, and everyone was having a good time. I just forgot about time. I forgot about getting that last train home to see my girlfriend. As you can imagine, she started to get really worried. She couldn't contact me because I had no signal on my phone. My phone was in my jacket, but I just couldn't feel any vibration from the phone, and there was no reception. And by the time I checked out, it was mid-morning. I stumbled into a taxi. I somehow managed to get back home. I tried to avoid seeing her by sneaking into the bathroom and try to get a bit of shut eye in the bathtub. But she, of course, was still awake. You know, she was worried sick about where I was and if I was safe. And I couldn't face telling her what was actually going through my mind at the time until I sobered up. And she gave me the opportunity to just kind of share what was going through my mind, because she noticed that not only was I a little lost, but I felt like I had no direction. And it was this opening up that really helped not only begin the path to what I do today, but helped to bring us closer, because I had held so much back from her, because I had felt as a man that I should own the journey I was on, that I had to overcome these challenges and problems myself, and that I shouldn't involve her in what I was going through. But I realized as I shared it with her that it was important to be transparent, that it was important to talk about this. And it made me realize that the first place I had to address was my physical energy. I mean, I was getting little sleep. I wasn't eating well. I was surviving on takeaway and junk food, and I just didn't have time to exercise, and so my weight got the better of me, and so that became the first thing I had to address. And I remember I handed in my resignation, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. I simply said to myself, as long as I'm out of this job, I will find another job that would give me the time to focus on my physical energy again. And that's exactly what I did. I handed in my resignation. I moved away from sales and trading, which was the function I was working in Lehman Brothers and also the hedge fund after that, into a more research-driven role. And in these research roles, it was much more 9 to 5. And so it gave me the freedom and the flexibility after work and on the weekends to not only address my physical energy, but also to start to rediscover what it is I wanted to do.
Well, you mentioned as you were starting to tell this story that it's what we learn through those challenges, right? We have to go through these moments in life to be able to come out the other side and to look for what were the lessons that came from this. And as we talk about the first part of the book, Awaken Your Power, you do go into specific details on questions that you were asking yourself, how you actually, the first steps that you began to take. So let's talk about the very first things that you began to do when you knew that it was time. You know, you had to gain control of your physical health, your mental health. Walk us through what some of the first steps were that you began to take, that you started to see changes.
Sure. So for me, first, just to put things into context, when I talk about energy, I see energy in 4 dimensions: physical, which I've already touched on, but also mental energy, emotional energy, and spiritual energy. And for me, physical energy was the first place I had to start. And it's also why I started the first chapter of the book about physical energy. Because if there is anything that the COVID pandemic has taught us, is that without your physical health, you can't do much. I mean, there's a popular saying that goes, when you are healthy, you have many hopes, dreams, and wishes. But when you're sick, you only have one. And so for me, physical energy was the baseline to get the energy required to focus on what matters most. And so when I talk about physical energy, there are 3 pillars. It is your sleep, it is your exercise and movement, and it is your nutrition. What are you feeding your body? And so for me, those 3 pillars had to be addressed first, because I understood that I could read all the tips and strategies and hacks out there online or in books. But if I simply didn't have the energy to apply them or follow through with them, then what use were they? And so physical energy for me was the beginning. And then the next part was getting the space. And when I talk about space, I'm talking about mental energy here, the space to focus on what my version of success is. And this is where spiritual energy comes into the equation, because many of us are low on spiritual energy. What I mean by that is, when you are doing work that is not aligned to the work that you actually want to do, and the tasks that you are doing feel like a chore, and they don't allow you to express your strengths, your talents, and your gifts, you feel a bit of tension inside of you. That is what we call low on spiritual energy. There's a feeling of frustration that comes from within. And that's because you're going against your natural grain. You have an inner compass that knows what you are meant to do, but because you're going against it, there's that feeling of tension. Whereas when you're high on spiritual energy, the work that you're doing is exactly the work that you want to do. And the tasks that you're doing are the things that allow you to express your potential. And so I had to ask myself those questions, such as, what did success mean to me? What sort of impact did I want to have in the world to start that journey? And while we don't always wake up in the morning knowing exactly what we want to do for the rest of our life, for me, it was about following my curiosities. What am I most curious about right now? Take that first step and then ask myself again, what did this tell me? What is my next step? And just take the next step and the next step and the next step. And what I began to realize is that there is energy behind momentum. When you start to have that feeling of momentum, it energizes you. And it begins with just one step. And that's what I started doing. Ask myself better questions, follow my curiosity, and apply what I was learning. And then just build that momentum.
So, question for you, for someone who is listening right now, who is in a job that doesn't necessarily provide them fulfillment,
Mm,
joy, they don't feel like they're making a contribution, but they need the job because they have to generate some income,
mm.
and this is what they're doing in the moment. What can they do to go through a similar process and still be able to feel the level of energy and spiritual energy as well as the physical? What should they be focused on, or what questions maybe could they be asking themselves?
Sure. Well, I think the obvious first question for me is what are you most curious about right now? Because if you've only done one job in one industry, just like I did, I only did finance, I was in the financial industry. I spent my time outside of work with people in finance. So I didn't know any different. There was no other world to me. I was in a bubble. So when you are in a bubble and you don't know much else out there, the first place is to literally just follow what you're curious about now and start to expose yourself to different environments. That's how you start to see more possibilities. Now, in order to do that, one of the first things you must do is to make space in your calendar for you to do that exploration. A lot of people would tell me, Simon, that sounds great, but I don't have time in the weekdays or weekends. I've got obligations. I've got this that I signed up to. I'm spending time with my family in the weekends. Now, what I say to them is it is not a question of time. It's a question of how important it is to you to actually start building a path towards something more fulfilling. Because if it is important to you, you will make time. So it's less a question of time, more a question of priorities. I joke with audiences sometimes when I say, if a friend of yours were to recommend a must watch Netflix series, I guarantee you will find the time to watch it. And that is because everybody else is watching it. You feel like you're missing out. And suddenly it becomes less a question of time, more a question of this is a priority for me. I want to watch that TV show. And so that would be the next step is to make time, give yourself oxygen to actually explore those things that you could be curious about. And then just take small steps. The other side of it is the mental game. This is where mental energy comes into it. If you are in a job that is frustrating, and that is one of the reasons why you want to pursue something different, you have to reframe your experience of it in order to energize you to take action towards something better. Now, what I mean by this is that if you see your job as a dead end, of course, that is going to feel exhausting and draining on your energy. But if you have something exciting and magnetic to look forward to, and you reframe your job as merely a stepping stone to where you actually want to be, suddenly it actually changes your relationship with your job. You become grateful for the salary. You become grateful for the holidays because that gives you the resources in order to build that path towards something more fulfilling. And so, because you change your relationship with your job and then you have something magnetic to work towards, that's how you begin to energize the process.
Ah, wonderful. Some great information there for us all. So I know that I've been in certain positions throughout my life that maybe I didn't feel that they were leading me in the right direction, but it was the opportunity that I needed at that moment. And had I had a tool such as being able to reframe the situation, gain some greater perspective, look at it differently, look at it as a stepping stone, it would have made a significant difference.
Mm,
And, I think about, as you were sharing about momentum, just taking that step, one step leads to the next, that leads to the
mm,
next. You are absolutely right. I mean, I know that from my own experience, that has been tremendous. And it's so interesting that leading up to taking that first step, there's so many things that we can tell ourselves that can hold us back from actually moving forward and taking that very first step. But once we do, it's like the
mm,
world opens up for us, right? It's like
mm,
relationships change, the way that we see what we're doing, the way that we show up is very different. So momentum is definitely our friend.
mm,
So also in this in this particular first section, you talk about, you talked about the getting your body healthy, your mind healthy, spirituality. You talk also about elevating our consciousness and then having an attitude of gratitude. Speak to that for a moment.
Sure. So what I mean by elevating our consciousness is really deepening our awareness, because at a high level, you cannot have self-development without self-awareness, because you simply can't change what you're not aware of. And so if we are wanting to see greater wisdom, that begins with knowing ourselves first. So that's what I mean by elevating our consciousness. And so one of the activities that I share in that chapter is writing down your thoughts, i.e., journaling, because the process of taking what is in your mind and downloading it onto paper allows you to not only understand yourself better, but also to get some clarity on the next best steps. And that's why if you look at some of the most successful people, they would talk about time they use to do introspective work, to reflect on their experiences, to plan for the year ahead. This can be called journaling. This can be called keeping a diary, taking notes, whatever you want to call it. It's still all about the process of writing and getting to know you. So this is what I mean by elevating our consciousness. Now, as part of that, we can include the practice of gratitude. But for me, in the book, I talk about gratitude with intention. And it's that second part that is important, because many of us, I think, in today's society have now reduced gratitude to just writing 3 quick things at the end of each day, such that it loses its importance over time and its impact. We just write things such as, today was sunny. Today I spoke to a friend. I got a free coffee. And so we just end up writing it as a way of ticking the box that we've noted 3 things down that we're grateful. Gratitude with intention is actually slowing the process down so you can feel the impact of gratitude at a very visceral level. And to give an example, there's an exercise I shared in the chapter in which I get the readers to do 3 things. The first is to write down the name of somebody that you can be grateful for right now. Second is to write down why. Why did you choose this person that came to your mind? And then the third is to pick up your phone and to call them. At a minimum, you want to send a voice note, because your voice carries more energy than a text message. If I receive a text message, I have to make up the emotion. I don't know where that message or text is coming from. What place is it coming from? But with voice, we can feel it, even if it is just a voice note. And this is what I mean by gratitude with intention. You are actually slowing down to express that gratitude to someone. And what I've learned and I've experienced myself is the more that we express gratitude with intention, even a short handwritten note to someone, it can have such a profound impact on what you attract into your energetic field.
Yeah, so true. Since reading your book, that particular exercise about leaving a voice memo for someone is something that I'm doing more often. I was doing it to a degree prior to, because I had been receiving voice memos and they were short, but they were meaningful. And I think to accentuate what you just said, it allows the emotion, it allows the energy that person is projecting at that moment to come through in their voice, and you feel it. And so it really is, it's a great way to send a quick message to someone. And just to think about, to your point, who am I grateful for? Why am I grateful for that person? But then take it to the next step and actually let them know that you're on my heart at this moment. I just wanted to thank you for what that happens to be, whatever you're thinking
and I think we underestimate the power that can have. One of my clients that I've been working with, Jay, he runs a small startup company, has around 25 employees. And he started to embrace this idea, and he has told me how much it has transformed the culture and the relationship within his teams. And he shared with me that there was this colleague of his called Danny, and after a pitch that they did to some investors, he dropped Danny a voice note on the evening of the pitch. And he simply said, Danny, I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you did for this pitch. In particular, it was evident that you did the preparation, and it seems like it went down well with the investors. Regardless of the outcome, it's great effort on your part, and I'm looking forward to working more together. Now, it was a very short message, but because it was specific, it came from a place of gratitude and appreciation. The impact that had on Danny was incredible. I mean, he didn't get a pay rise, he didn't get a title change, but he just got sent a note of appreciation, which cost us nothing. And yet the impact was profound.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I would also just share that one of the things that I am trying to incorporate more often is to do that in the moment. So the moment that I'm thinking about someone, something, and it doesn't have to be when I'm writing in my gratitude journal as an example, or specific times of the day, but if somebody crosses my mind and there's something that I want to thank that person for, some particular reason that I'm grateful to have that individual in my life, right then and there is the moment that I do it, because I want the thought to create the energy that leads to the action, and I want the emotion that I'm feeling in that moment to come through in my voice to that individual.
I love that, Jay.
Thank you. And thank you. So let's go to the next section where we talk about rewiring. So this is where, you get much more involved in the strategic or the actual applications, the things that you did to rewire, from silencing the inner critic to fighting for what matters. So let's take a couple key areas from rewire, and let's put some talking points around that and give our listeners some things that they can apply to help them out in their lives.
The first one that comes to my mind is the power of thought. I mean, this is something we covered briefly earlier in this conversation. Thought leads to feeling, and feeling leads to action. Yet we don't appreciate that quite as much as we should. Because if we look at the world, there is no one reality. We like to think there's one reality that is common to all of us, but there isn't one common reality. There are only customized realities. Now, what this means is that when an event or an experience happens to you, the way that you interpret it will be very different to your partner, your colleague, or your friend. Now, this thereby determines the action that you take. Now, if this is the case, we can choose new thoughts. We can choose new thoughts that are more empowering, that are more productive, and that will actually guide us to take better action. And when we appreciate that superpower, that's when we can begin bending and shaping our reality to something that works for us and not against us. And for me, this begins with the idea of beliefs and what you speak to yourself, how you speak to yourself, the words that you use. Because if you tell yourself you can't do something, if you tell yourself you have no artistic bone in your body, it's going to take years, maybe the rest of your life, before you begin something, because those words serve a death sentence to your potential. And so once we begin to understand that, for me, it's about choosing the things that you want to believe in. There is this concept I share in the book, and it's the opposite meaning of the word paranoia. Paranoia is a belief that lots of people hold in society, which is, I'm a victim. This person is sabotaging my chance for promotion. Why can't I succeed in this industry? It's against me. The system is against me. Now, these things may be the case. However, if you just jump to those beliefs all the time, you're not going to take any action to change your present. Whereas imagine if you embraced pronoia. Pronoia has the opposite meaning to paranoia. Pronoia is this belief that the universe is conspiring in your favor, that life is working for you and not against you. Now, just imagine for a moment what life would be like, what possibilities would be born if you saw life working for you and not against you, such that every setback and challenge you face serves you a lesson. So instead of saying, why me, you think, what is the lesson here? Instead of thinking, this means I'm not meant to do it, how about thinking, what is the opportunity that has come as a result? So what you're doing here is you're molding reality into something that helps you. And this is what I mean by rewiring your energetic state. Once you realize that you have that power, you can begin picking things that serve you over things that don't. And here's something to reflect on. If you don't let go of the thoughts that are holding you back, what you want becomes what you let go of.
Wow, that is so powerful. And I want to share something from my own personal experience of doing a lot of work on reframing, a lot of work on flipping the script in my mind and changing the power that I at one point gave to those negative thoughts, taking that power away and applying it to something that was empowering for me, that actually would move me forward versus holding me back. It did not happen overnight. So I say that only because anything, as I look at what you're describing here, anything worth doing takes time, it takes energy, and it takes doing the work. So I think, you hit the nail on the head. Pick those few things that are specific to you in terms of the things that you're telling yourself that I can't do this, or I can't do that, or I'm not good enough for this. Pick 2 or 3 of them and start to reframe and use different language. And then it goes back to momentum, right? So once you start to take those first steps and start to do this work, it becomes, you start to see the changes. And as you see the changes, it encourages you and motivates you and inspires you to do more of it.
Definitely. And, sometimes it's just having that courage to begin, because I think deep down, all of us know what that next step is. We just have to discover the courage to take it. We might jump to the excuse of, I'm not confident. When I'm more confident, then I will take that step. But what you and I come to realize is that confidence is never a prerequisite. Confidence is something you gain when you have the courage to take a step into the unknown. Once you've taken that step, however small, that's how you build your confidence. And then the next time you take the second step, you're more confident. But you can't build the confidence if you're not taking any action or steps. And that is why clarity and confidence only comes from the action that you take. There's the idea of maps that I share in the second part of the book. And what I mean by maps is that when you embark on a new journey, especially into the unknown, you don't get given the entire map and direction up front. You get given some of it, but you don't get given all of it. But as you take those steps forward, what happens is more of the map starts to unravel in front of you. The map starts to show itself the more steps that you take forward. And that for me is exciting. This is how I have reframed the unknown. Unknown to me used to be scary. Now, unknown for me is exciting, because for me, the way I see it is that when everything is unknown, anything is possible.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a great way of looking at it. So let's go to protect, the next section, where one of the things that you touch on is to stop prioritizing other people's needs over yours. Now, that's a huge one. So speak to that, and also the power of saying no and why that's so important.
Sure. Well, on the first one, a quote comes to mind from Bronnie Ware's book, The Top Regrets of the Dying. She shared that the top regret of the dying was the fact that I wish I lived a life more true to myself than a life lived for others. And the tragedy is that so many of us are living a life for others and not ourselves. By the time we've said yes to everyone else, we don't have the energy to say yes to ourselves. And so what happens is that we are the only ones suffering while everybody else benefits. And this leads to the next part about the importance of saying no. You have to say no to the things that do not matter to you and where and who you want to be, so that you can say yes to the things that do. There is trade-offs that we have to make in life. Unfortunately, every day has a time limit. We only have 24 hours each day. And so every time you are saying yes to something, you are also saying no to something else. You have to be careful to understand what you are saying yes to and no to, because the very things that you're saying yes to could be the distractions that are taking you away from what you actually want to be working towards. And that's why setting up energetic shields to protect your energy for what matters most is vitally important. You have to give yourself the oxygen, the time, the space to focus on the things that will make you feel fulfilled.
Yeah, gosh, this is so good. And again, I wish I had had this book so many years ago. It would have resolved a lot of challenges that I was facing, a lot of challenges that I know others that were around me also were facing. But the ability to be able to establish boundaries and to be able to say no really puts a tremendous amount of power in your own hands. And I know for people that are people pleasers, that is very difficult to do because we want to be able to say yes to everything. When we say no, right, we almost feel like we take that negative energy on ourselves because we think that, well, we're not helping, we're not serving somebody. But to your point, the reality is the more we do that, the more we say yes to things that don't align with our goals, our aspirations, what are important to us. It leaves no mental bandwidth. It leaves no time. It leaves no space for us to be able to create and accomplish the things that truly are meaningful or move our goals forward. So much goodness in this particular chapter. So let's talk then about Supercharge. And this is around being an internal student, speaking less and listening more, which is a huge one, and making a difference in someone's life. So let's talk about Supercharge.
Sure. So, at a fundamental level, the key message from the part supercharge your impact plays to the statement that your value is determined by how much more you have given to the world than you have taken from it. Now, in order to adapt and thrive, regardless of the world throws your way, that's where being an internal student comes into play. Because the more that you're learning, the more that you are accumulating knowledge, not just from within your industry, but from outside of people with very different backgrounds and experiences, the more know-how you begin to have to respond in very creative ways to whatever the world throws your way. I mean, again, if we look back at some of the crises that I've mentioned, the global financial crisis, if we look at the COVID pandemic, in both crises, there were companies who folded, who did not survive. Yet there were other companies that did really well and adapted throughout those challenging periods. Now, the difference is because those that survived and thrived were embracing that white belt mentality, that eternal student mindset. They were willing to learn. They had that humility to know they didn't know it all. And so when you are constantly learning, constantly growing, i.e., being better than who you were yesterday, you equip yourself with the ability to pivot, to adapt, and to use whatever is thrown your way as fuel to come back stronger. And this is how you begin to supercharge your impact. If you don't have that in place, well, the first obstacle challenge that comes your way, you're going to give up, or you just don't know how to respond. And then this leads towards thinking about the impact you want to have, thinking about how you can understand others, knowing that you never get to the top alone. You get to the top because of the people you surround yourself with. And in order to have that impact, you've got to understand people. Everything is ultimately a people business. So when you start to listen more to other people, that gives you data. That gives you data about their desires, their strengths, their weaknesses, their challenges, their goals, their mission. And that allows you to relate to them better. This helps to elevate your emotional energy or your emotional intelligence because you're able to understand people at a deeper level. And it helps you to put together the teams and the processes and the partnerships that can help you achieve what you want.
Outstanding. So let's talk about listening skills for a moment. Share with our listeners. This is one of those areas, and I'm backing up for just a moment because this is one of those areas that, in the work that I do, the work that you do, this kind of conversation is an example where, we're listening to one another. We're engaged in a conversation. You might ask me something, I ask you something, but we're asking a question because we're curious. We want to know. we want to learn, and we pause, right? We're listening versus thinking about what's the next thing that I'm going to say, or I'm thinking about how I'm going to structure another question. So let's give some examples or some tactical things that our listeners can start to put into practice that can help them be a more engaged listener.
For me, the first practical tip on how to be a more engaged listener is to be curious about that person's world, because that will help you not only understand them, but it will give them a gift that few will ever experience, which is to be heard, to be understood and appreciated. So, to give an example how most conversations might go, let's call one of these characters Sally and the other character John. Sally might come to John and say, "Hey, John, it's been a while since we last caught up. I've started to pick up writing my book again." And John may respond, "Fantastic, good work. I can't wait until it's released. Do you want to hear what I've been up to?" Now, that is how most conversations may go. Now, imagine if instead John was listening with curiosity, with a desire to want to understand. So Sally again shares with John, "Hey, John, it's been a while since we last caught up. I've picked up writing my book again, which I stopped for a while." Now, John may respond with a question such as, "How long have you been in that process, Sally?" Sally may then say, "Oh, it's been 5 years since I first started putting my ideas together." What stopped you making more progress than you have been making so far? Now, John's got Sally thinking, but at the same time, John is getting a greater understanding about what is going on in Sally's life. So notice the difference here. The first case was John listening to reply, focusing on him. The second scenario was John listening to understand, to want to know Sally at a deeper level. Now, what happens in the second scenario is both people benefit. John gets to know more about Sally and perhaps how he could be of service. Sally also gets greater clarity on her thoughts that she's sharing with John.
Love that. What a great example to use. And I know this is an area that I can continue to improve on as well. It is one that I work on, but I think, and you said this, and that is to, when we're engaged in a conversation, curiosity, right, for sure, and to go into the conversation to understand versus trying to be understood. And when the focus is on the other person, I would completely agree with you that the impact is so much greater for both parties involved. And so I love that example, and I love the tip that you gave there on how we can become better listeners and more engaged, and how to focus on the conversation through curiosity.
It's a powerful habit, Jay, and sometimes I refer to this analogy when I talk to audiences about the power of listening. Now, if you've ever watched a Sherlock Holmes TV series or movie, you will know that when a client comes into Sherlock's offices and says, "Sherlock, something's happened. I need you to help solve this case." Sherlock won't go straight out and say, "I know the answer." Sherlock will invite that client to sit in the armchair. He will himself sit down on the armchair and he will ask a series of questions. He wants to put himself into the client's mind, to almost be there when that event happened. And so because he's listening to understand, he gets the data he needs to solve the mystery. And that, for me, is a great example of the power of listening. It's not that he has any special powers. It's that when he speaks to someone, he's completely present in the moment. He listens to what they're sharing. He notices what they're wearing, what they're not wearing. He's able to be completely focused on the person in front of him.
Yeah, that's a great example as well. And you're so right. As you're telling that story, I can see that unfolding, and watched enough of those movies and those shows to see that in action. And it is pretty amazing. And there is nothing better than having a good, deep, meaningful conversation and connecting with someone one-on-one or in a group setting, but truly listening and showing the other person that you value them and that you're interested in who they are, and what a great way to serve. So for all of you that are watching and listening right now, we have touched on some of the key areas in the new book, Energize. We certainly are going to provide a link to be able to purchase a copy of the book. I would encourage you to definitely buy a copy. Also, another way to experience this book is on Audible. And the great thing is you just heard Simon, his energy and the way that he shows up, the way that he speaks. He actually does the voice work on his own book. So if you want to hear more, if you want to learn more from Simon, definitely pick up a copy or purchase the Audible version of the book as well. So Simon, as we wrap up our conversation, there was a question that I asked you on the first episode we did together, where when we got to the end, I asked you to provide a challenge to our listeners. The challenge that you had given us at that time was to think about one action that you'll commit to, that you'll apply immediately. And you talked about having a bias to action. That's one of the greatest skills that we can cultivate. Please give us another challenge that we can work toward.
Sure. Well, this challenge is a nice lead on from the last challenge. The first challenge was about taking action, applying one thing, at least one thing that you took away from that episode. This challenge is connected to some of the things I shared at the beginning of the session. I shared about how I got Marie Forleo's endorsement, some of the bold things that I did in order to put myself in proximity to these chances. So my challenge to you is this: before the end of the year, what ways can you show up in bold ways that put you a little out of your comfort zone, that stretch you a little bit? How can you act bold in what you do? It can be small or big ways, but in what ways for you can you begin to act more boldly?
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And for all of you, please take Simon up on that challenge and share with us what bold action you took. And we'll make sure that we get that to Simon as well. So before I ask my final question, why don't you share with us the best place to go to connect with you and consume your content?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jay. I am on all the major social media platforms, but the two that I use the most are LinkedIn and Instagram. So LinkedIn, simply search Simon Alexander Ong and click the person, not the company. And then on Instagram, my handle is at Simon Alexander O.
Outstanding. Well, we will certainly link to that in the show notes. And by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention to you that you have a beautiful family. You have shared some pictures, and I love seeing the smiling faces, and that's such it brings a lot of warmth to my heart. So here is my final question to you. What is one of the most valuable lessons that you've learned from a client, from a coaching client of yours, that you didn't expect?
I think one of the most powerful lessons I've learned from a client of mine is that you are ready whenever you believe you are. Now, here's something that gives a little more context to it. So I was coaching this particular client, and he was in a corporate job. He had just left his corporate job, and he was starting up his coaching business. And he saw my work, and he wanted to work with me because he saw me as ahead of him, and doing what he wanted to do. And so we had only about 4 or 5 sessions. And I started to work with him on how he could start to build his profile, on how he could start working with clients to bring in some revenue to the business. And he shared with me on the WhatsApp channel that we had that he had connected with editors of some incredible magazines, that he had just secured free speaking opportunities. And he was showing me that he was ready, despite not having the sort of income many would want first before they felt ready to take on the bigger steps and goals. He was simply treating it like a game. And that's what amazed me, because that is exactly how we are to approach any journey. To make it fun, to make it enjoyable, is to think of the process like a game. And he was reveling in treating it like a game. And he couldn't help but keep sharing in our chat all the things that he was doing, the responses that he was getting, the invites that he was having, the people that he was speaking to. He was literally putting the things that we discussed into action by going beyond just doing those things and acting boldly, something that I challenge you to do as well.
So good. What a great lesson to learn. Thank you for sharing that. And Simon Alexander Ong, you're an amazing person. Thank you so much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat Round 2. This was a great conversation. I appreciate you for who you are, the way that you show up to the world, your amazing ability to communicate, to connect with people, your writings. Thank you so much for sharing today. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Jay, and thank you for having me on your show and holding this wonderful space.
It is absolutely my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so much for watching and listening. It means a great deal. And would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review? That goes a long, long way. So thank you for doing that in advance. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com/podcast. And until next time, keep learning and growing. Make sure you pick up a copy of Energize. You are going to love it. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Business Consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Business Consulting.